by Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia now. But to see a man like that, a man as distinguished as that, torn limb from limb by the digital mob, I mean, it was just awful. And in the last year of his life, shortly after he just about managed to put this episode behind him, he was diagnosed with cancer and died about 3 months later. Just awful.
Does this come from a kind of uniformity of views in universities where students aren't being taught all sides, aren't being taught about all the different arguments, aren't being, rigorously challenged in their sort of intellectual beliefs? Is that where it comes from?
I think it does come from that. I think a lot of it comes from that. I think you would expect universities to be places where expressing a dissenting point of view is tolerated. Pursuing a line of research which is controversial is tolerated. Encouraged. That's what universities are for, after all. If Charles Darwin had been treated like some of these gender-critical feminists are being treated by the trans-Taliban, he never would have been able to come up with the origin of the species when he was a student at Cambridge. And I think one of the reasons campuses have become places of such ideological conformity in the past 10, 15 years is because fewer and fewer conservatives are being hired to work at universities. I mean, it used to be that in the humanities and the social sciences, Labour voters outnumbered Conservative voters by about 3 to 1 in the 1960s. That was always the case. Most intellectuals, not all, but most were left-wing. So there was about a 3 to 1 ratio. But now, if you look at if you look at surveys of how university employees voted in the 2019 general election, something like 90% voted for left-of-centre parties, whether it was the Labour Party, the SNP, the Greens, the Lib Dems, and fewer than 10% voted for the Conservative Party. So now, left-of-centre academics outnumber right-of-centre academics by a ratio of 9 to 1, and that creates a really oppressive atmosphere on campus for anyone who feels inclined to challenge progressive orthodoxy. I recently participated in a debate at Durham University, and I think Durham isn't as bad as some. I think something like 20% of the students at Durham vote Conservative instead of 10%, which is the national average. And I participated in this debate, and I was defending Boris Johnson. It was in the middle of the general election campaign, so temperatures were running pretty high. But the woman on the other side, who was a Momentum activist, she called me a homophobe, a misogynist. Some guy in the audience, who turned out to be the co-chair of the Durham Labour Club, got up, and because I'd written something in The Spectator saying that one of Prince Andrew's problems, this was just after he'd appeared on Newsnight and had the train wreck interview with Emily Maitlis. I said in this piece in The Spectator one of his problems was that he didn't have a tough wife able to advise him not to do things like go and be interviewed by Emily Maitlis on Newsnight, which turned out to be a PR disaster. And when Emily Maitlis wanted to interview me back at the beginning of 2018 when I was getting mobbed, I was inclined to do it. She kept texting me saying, come on to Newsnight. I was going to do it. My wife said, no, that would be a big mistake. And she was right. And I said in this piece of The Spectator, if only Prince Andrew had had a tough, no-nonsense, sensible wife like mine, he might not have got into this particular difficulty. This guy who was the co-president of the Durham Labour Club, on the basis of me having written that piece, said, oh, so you're a paedophile, accused me of being a pedo. In this debate, it was supposed to be a grown-up debate in civilised circumstances, in one of the oldest debating societies, in one of Britain's most distinguished Russell Group universities. And the worst thing was, I'd taken my 11-year-old son, Charlie, with me to this debate, because we were going to go and see Derby QPR. We're QPR fans, and QPR were playing Derby at Pride Park the following day, so we were going to drive home via Derby. And there was my 11-year-old son, seeing me being called a misogynist, a homophobe, and now a pedo by a Labour activist in this debating chamber. And I put Charlie to bed afterwards back at the hotel, went to the Union Bar, and I said to this Labour activist, I said, didn't you have at least some inhibitions about calling me a child rapist in front of my 11-year-old son? I mean, I'm not. It's a smear. But there's a limit to what you can say about someone in front of their young children, isn't there? In a public forum, in a respectable environment like this. He said, no, you're a Tory tosser. Anything goes. And then this other guy came up to me in the bar, and I thought, oh no, another dose of kind of unpleasantness. He turned out to be really nice, polite, diffident. He was a conservative. He told me about how his first year at Durham had been absolutely ruined because some Labour activists on campus had got hold of some things he'd said on some forum that was designed for freshers before they actually arrived at Durham. He'd said some mildly conservative things. He was a Catholic, so he'd raised questions about whether priests should be forced to marry gay couples in Catholic churches. So now he was a homophobe and a bigot. He'd expressed some sympathy for the state of Israel, so he was being criticised. Now he was in favour of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, apparently. And not only was he kind of abused wherever he went thereafter on campus, the woman who'd been appointed as his mother, which is like a second-year or third-year student that the university appoints to look after you in your first couple of weeks. She accused him of being a bigot. She persuaded a gay friend of hers to make a pass at him in some cack-handed attempt to expose his bigotry. And she was supposed to be, mentoring him. She was supposed to be this kind of pastoral kind of carer. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Someone slapped him in the face in the bar. A guy threw a plate at him in the college dining hall and hurled him to the ground just for the sin of being a Tory. And I thought to myself, I knew it was bad being a kind of white, conservative, heterosexual male on campus, but I didn't know it was quite that bad. But that is the treatment, I think. And he said, all his friends at other universities experiencing exactly the same thing. If you challenge progressive orthodoxy on campus now, if you even challenge the idea that Corbyn is the second coming, you're liable to be slapped in the face, have plates thrown at you, hurled to the ground, insulted wherever you go, ostracised. That's the kind of atmosphere on campus. And these are, universities. This kid, first kid in his family to go to university, he was paying, 27 grand in tuition fees alone for the privilege of having abuse hurled at him by these kind of so-called social justice activists. I mean, it was just unspeakable. Universities like Durham need to be doing more to protect people like that. And I hope that, in future, if someone like that is a member of the Free Speech Union, we'll be able to bring pressure to bear on institutions like Durham to make sure people who have the temerity to express themselves and who don't necessarily conform to the dogma on campus aren't singled out and persecuted like that.
So you've obviously talked about universities there, a great example of where free speech is under threat. Can you talk to viewers about the Maya Forstater case? And if she was part of your Free Speech Union, what may have been different or how you could have helped her?
So I think the Maya Forstater case is, she is a tax advisor and worked for a charity which offered disadvantaged people tax advice, I think some refugees as I understand it. And she